Silence's strategy has been misunderstood by many men because they assume that the absence of words is the absence of intent, but in truth, silence is often the sharpest blade in the arsenal of power. When a woman withholds her words, when she deliberately chooses not to answer, not to argue, not to reveal what she is thinking, she is not retreating. She is advancing without movement. Her silence is not emptiness. It is a calculated move designed to test the stability of the ground beneath your feet. In those moments of withheld expression, she is measuring more than your reaction. She is measuring your foundation. The silence is not passive. It is active, deliberate, and surgical. Each second that stretches without a word is a probe into your need for control. Do you scramble to fill the void with noise, explanations, and assurances? Do you press her, demand answers, or reveal your insecurity by showing her that you cannot sit in uncertainty? If so, the silence has already achieved its goal. It has exposed the weakness you thought was hidden, the dependency you tried to disguise with confidence. Silence functions like a mirror. It does not speak, but it forces you to see yourself clearly. The strategic power of silence lies in its ability to bypass direct confrontation. A quarrel or an argument can be won or lost with words, but silence denies you that arena. It takes away the weapons you feel comfortable using. You cannot persuade silence. You cannot outshout silence. You cannot reason with silence. It traps you in the battlefield of your own mind. That is why it is so effective. It destabilizes not by attacking, but by withholding, not by striking, but by refusing. Machiavellian wisdom would tell you that silence is not the absence of action, but the most disciplined form of action. To withhold is to rule without declaring. When she employs silence, she is not running from the exchange, she is recentering it around you. Now, the question is not what she thinks, but how you will endure. The test becomes, can you stay composed when clarity is denied, when certainty is withheld, when your instinct demands you chase what retreats? Many men cannot. They fold under the pressure of ambiguity, revealing themselves as desperate for reassurance. And in that collapse, the power shifts entirely. Yet silence's strategy can only succeed if you do not recognize it. The moment you see it for what it is, the spell weakens. If you understand that her withholding is a tactic to measure your strength, then you can use that very silence to display it. You need not answer the unspoken challenge with noise. Instead, you demonstrate composure. You let the pause stretch without your surrender. You refuse to be lured into proving yourself. The real victory comes not from breaking the silence, but from showing that you cannot be broken by it. This is why the most dangerous opponent is the one who does not rush to fill the empty space. He is the one who can sit still, who can carry the weight of uncertainty without letting it bend him. In his steadiness, silence turns back on itself. Instead of exposing him, it exposes the one who wields it. The woman who intended to destabilize finds herself confronted with a man who cannot be moved, a man who will not chase, a man who will not surrender composure for the illusion of control. Silence then becomes her own prison, forcing her to speak, to act, to reveal. Silence's strategy is a weapon of control, but only against those who fear it. To the man who understands, it is nothing more than a stage upon which to display his true strength, the strength of patience, of self-command, of a movable presence. By refusing to collapse into reaction, he transforms her silence into his power, turning the calculated move of withholding into an involuntary act of surrender. The test of composure is one of the most subtle yet brutal challenges a man can face, because it strikes not at his words or his actions, but at his ability to remain still when every fiber of his being urges him to react. When a woman goes quiet, when she withholds her voice and retreats into silence, it is not because she has nothing to say. It is because she is testing what you will do with the void she has created. Her quietness is not absence. It is a mirror. It reflects not her weakness, but your capacity to endure uncertainty without breaking apart. Most men fear silence more than conflict. Conflict gives them something to fight against, something to argue with, a stage on which to prove themselves. But silence removes all props, all weapons, all distractions. It leaves a man face to face with his own insecurity. In the gap where her words should be, doubt creeps in. Is she angry? Is she pulling away? Does she still admire me? Am I losing her? These questions echo louder than any spoken accusation because they have no answer, only speculation. And speculation is where a man either proves his composure or betrays it. To crumble under uncertainty is to show that your sense of worth is dependent on constant reassurance. The moment you chase her silence, beg for an explanation, or demand clarity, you admit that you cannot function without external validation. You reveal that her stillness has power over you, that your stability is conditional on her engagement. Once that truth is exposed, the balance shifts. She knows that silence can unmake you, and from that point forward, she holds the reins of control. What began as a simple pause in conversation becomes a weapon she can wield at will. But the man who remains unshaken in the face of silence communicates something entirely different. He demonstrates that his composure is not a mask but a fortress. He does not need noise to feel secure, nor does he need her words to confirm his strength. His calmness under pressure speaks louder than any reassurance she might offer. He shows that he can withstand the unknown without falling apart, that he is not a slave to clarity, and that he will not betray himself in the search for answers. In doing so, he passes the test she set without announcing that he is even aware of it. Machiavelli would argue that power lies not in conquering others, but in governing oneself. Here, self-governance is everything. The man who can control his reaction when silence tempts him to unravel proves that he is the ruler of his own emotions. And a man who rules himself cannot easily be ruled by another. His composure is not indifference, it is discipline. It is the refusal to let uncertainty dictate his state of mind. In that refusal, he becomes untouchable. The test of composure is also a test of time. The longer the silence stretches, the greater the temptation to break it. Seconds feel like hours, and hours like days. Weakness disguises itself as urgency. I must say something. I must resolve this. I must know what she is thinking. But patience is the shield. By enduring without yielding, by refusing to crumble under the weight of not knowing, he turns time into an ally. The silence that was meant to unsettle him instead unsettles her because she expected movement and none came. Her quietness is designed to provoke, but when provocation fails, respect is born. She realizes that her silence cannot manipulate him, cannot pull him into desperation, cannot reduce his authority. Instead, it highlights his immovable presence. He does not fight her silence, nor does he fear it. He lets it hang, lets it press, lets it reveal the depth of his self-command. And in the end, the one who remains unshaken in the face of silence is the one who wins, not by force, but by the power of composure itself. Machiavellian insight teaches that the true essence of power does not reside in constant noise, flamboyant gestures, or reactive outbursts, but in the quiet mastery of self. Patience, restraint, and calculated response form the invisible architecture of authority. To those who misunderstand power, silence appears as weakness, restraint looks like hesitation, and patience seems like delay. Yet to Machiavelli, and to anyone who has studied the deeper mechanics of influence, these qualities are not passive, they are the very engines of control. For what greater show of strength exists than the ability to wait when others are rushing, to hold back when others are spilling their hand, and to respond only when the moment guarantees impact? Noise is seductive. It makes a man feel alive, present, noticed. Shouting one's position, declaring one's dominance, reacting quickly to every stimulus, these are the shallow symbols of strength. But strength without endurance is an illusion. The man who reacts to every provocation is a puppet, his strings pulled by anyone clever enough to agitate him. Machiavellian wisdom cuts through this illusion. The one who cannot restrain himself cannot command others. Power that is loud is power that is fragile, because it depends on constant reinforcement. Power that is quiet, however, stands on its own because it is not desperate to be recognized. Patience is the first pillar of this insight. To be patient is not to be idle, but to wait with intent. A patient man allows events to unfold until the right moment appears. He does not rush to resolve every uncertainty, nor does he demand immediate gratification. Instead, he studies the field, observes the movements of others, and times his actions so that when he finally does step forward, his presence carries inevitability. This is why patience is feared by those who rely on chaos. It cannot be provoked, it cannot be rushed, it cannot be defeated by urgency. Restraint is the second pillar. It is the ability to hold back, to deny oneself the easy release of anger, the cheap satisfaction of retaliation, or the fragile comfort of over-explaining. Restraint is not suppression but strategy. It is the conscious choice to conserve energy until it can be spent with maximum effect. The man who shows restraint communicates that he is in control, not of her, not of others, but of himself. And control of self is the foundation upon which all external power is built. When she tests him with silence, with withdrawal, or with provocation, his refusal to collapse into reaction becomes his crown. The third pillar, calculated response, separates the ruler from the ruled. A calculated response is never rushed, never emotional, never desperate. It is measured, deliberate, and often delayed until the moment when it will achieve the greatest result with the least effort. Machiavelli would advise that it is not the frequency of action that matters, but the precision of it. A single well-timed move can outweigh 100 careless reactions. And so the man who learns to calculate his responses turns every exchange into an opportunity for demonstration of his composure and foresight. Together, patience, restraint, and calculated response form a kind of silent power that unsettles more deeply than any display of force. For when a man refuses to be provoked, he strips his challenger of control. When he does not rush to fill silence, he forces others to confront their own discomfort. When he waits for the perfect moment to act, he makes his presence undeniable. This is the Machiavellian insight. True power is not about noise, but about timing, not about reaction, but about mastery, not about appearing strong, but about being unmovable even when tested. In this way, authority becomes less about what is shown and more about what is withheld, less about how much is said and more about how much is endured. Control of emotion is the dividing line between those who are easily manipulated and those who command respect without demanding it. The man who allows anger to govern his decisions, insecurity to dictate his words, or the craving for validation to steer his actions is forever at the mercy of others. Every provocation, every silent test, every withheld glance becomes a string tied to his movements. He imagines himself free, but in truth he is a puppet dancing to emotions he cannot master. To become unassailable, a man must first conquer the storm within, for only then can he withstand the storms outside. Anger is the most obvious trap. It promises power in the heat of the moment, but in reality it is the most transparent form of weakness. To lose control in anger is to reveal to the world that another person can dictate your state of mind. A sharp word, a prolonged silence, a calculated insult, all it takes is a spark, and if you ignite, you have handed over control. The man who masters anger, however, disarms this trap completely. He may feel the fire, but he does not let it spill. Instead, he channels it, containing it until it becomes clarity rather than chaos. His refusal to explode makes him unpredictable, and unpredictability is power. Insecurity is subtler, yet more corrosive. It whispers that you are not enough unless others prove it to you. It urges you to chase reassurance, to seek constant confirmation of your worth. When a woman grows silent, insecurity whispers louder. She must be losing interest, you must win her back, you must act. And in that moment, if you move to appease, if you scramble for validation, you confirm the very weakness she was testing for. Insecurity enslaves by convincing you that peace can only come from outside approval. The man who destroys this illusion and roots his worth in himself becomes untouchable. He no longer begs for affirmation because his foundation is internal, not external. Then there is the hunger for validation. This need is the most exploited weakness of all, for it makes men predictable. The one who craves validation will always chase praise, attention, and recognition, no matter how it is dangled before him. He becomes easy to read, easy to manipulate, easy to control. But the man who no longer needs validation moves differently. He can walk away without explanation, remain silent without guilt, and withhold reaction without fear. His power is unnerving because it is not contingent on anyone's approval. He becomes self-sufficient, and in that self-sufficiency he cannot be cornered. Machiavellian wisdom insists that rulers must govern themselves before they can govern others. The battlefield of power is not external but internal, and the greatest victories are not over opponents but over one's own impulses. A man who can master his emotions stands like a fortress, provoked but not shaken, tempted but not swayed, tested but not exposed. His calmness under attack frustrates aggressors, because nothing unsettles an opponent more than a man who refuses to be moved. Control of emotion does not mean suppression. Suppression is brittle, waiting to crack. True control means awareness, discipline, and choice. It is the ability to feel anger without being consumed by it, to recognize insecurity without being defined by it, to notice the desire for validation without being enslaved by it. Such control transforms emotions from chains into tools, from liabilities into sources of strength. The man who reaches this level of command becomes unassailable. No silence can unnerve him, no insult can destabilize him, no absence of approval can reduce him. He has cut the strings that others used to pull, and now he stands independent of their games. His strength is not in loud declarations, but in his refusal to be mastered by what lives within him. And because no one can govern the man who governs himself, he rises above the reach of manipulation and becomes the one who defines the terms of every encounter. Presence over persuasion is one of the most misunderstood dynamics of power, because most men believe that the way to win a woman's respect, loyalty, or admiration is through endless words, explanations, and arguments. They think persuasion is the path, that if they can speak well enough, reason convincingly enough, or justify themselves thoroughly enough, she will finally yield. But persuasion is a game of weakness when overused, because the very act of convincing implies that your authority is not self-evident. The man who must constantly persuade is already conceding that his presence alone is not enough, that he must add something extra to compensate. Real power does not need words, it radiates in silence. Winning is not about how well you argue, but how unshakable you remain without saying anything at all. True presence is not built in the moment, but forged long before it. It comes from a man's discipline, his self-control, his certainty in who he is and what he stands for. When he enters a room, his presence is not loud but undeniable. His energy says what his words do not need to. A woman who encounters such a man feels the weight of his authority without him ever lifting his voice. She does not need to be convinced of his value. She feels it in the steadiness of his gaze, in the calmness of his composure, in the way he does not chase her silence or stumble over his own explanations. Presence communicates more powerfully than persuasion ever can, because presence cannot be faked and cannot be argued with. Persuasion thrives on insecurity. When a man feels he is not enough as he is, he turns to words as a crutch. He explains, defends, justifies, hoping that if he says the right thing, he will secure her approval. But every explanation exposes dependency. Every attempt to win her through words shows that her judgment has the power to destabilize him. And once she sees that, the test is over, he has failed. Persuasion in this form is not power, it is submission disguised as charm. The man who truly holds authority does not explain himself endlessly because he does not need to. His actions, his composure, and his silence are all the proof he requires. Machiavellian insight reminds us that authority is about perception as much as it is about reality. When you stand firm, when you resist the temptation to chase, when you show that her silence cannot bend you, you project strength that needs no justification. Presence creates an atmosphere in which others bend without realizing why. Words can be resisted, argued against, ignored. Presence cannot. It seeps into the unspoken. It works on a level deeper than argument. It commands without demand. A woman who tests you with quietness is not looking for your persuasion. She is waiting to see if your presence can withstand her absence. This is why stillness is more powerful than speech. The man who holds himself steady, who does not flinch, who does not attempt to prove, becomes magnetic. His very restraint highlights his control, and control is the root of power. She realizes that he is not desperate to convince her because he does not need to win her approval to confirm his identity. This unsettles her because it is rare. Most men break under silence. Most men reach for persuasion. But the one who does neither becomes unforgettable. Presence over persuasion also protects you from exhaustion. Words require energy, but authority sustained through presence conserves it. Instead of scattering strength in endless explanations, you embody strength by needing none. You force her to step forward, to break her own silence, to seek your reaction instead of controlling it. In this reversal, the power dynamic shifts entirely in your favor, and you achieve what persuasion never could. Respect born not from argument, but from the undeniable gravity of who you are. Turning silence into advantage requires a fundamental shift in perception, because most men interpret a woman's withdrawal as rejection, disinterest, or a threat to their control. They panic when she withholds her words, mistaking her quietness as a wall that must be broken down immediately. They scramble to fill the space with apologies, explanations, and persuasion, all in an effort to pull her back into engagement. But in doing so, they fail the test entirely. Her silence is not the end of dialogue, it is the beginning of a deeper challenge. She withdraws not to disappear, but to observe. She wants to see whether you will collapse into the emptiness she has created or whether you will expand into it with strength. Silence is a vacuum, and nature despises a vacuum. Something always rushes in to fill it. When she goes quiet, the question is simple: what fills the void? If you flood it with desperation, she learns that you cannot stand alone. If you chase her words, beg for her attention, or lose yourself in insecurity, you prove that her silence governs you. But if you meet the void with calm dominance, you flip the strategy back onto her. Instead of silence weakening you, it begins to weaken her, because it reveals that she cannot destabilize you no matter how long she withholds. Calm dominance is not arrogance, nor is it indifference. It is the unshakable confidence of a man who does not need validation to define his worth. When she withdraws, he does not chase. He does not break down the door of her silence with frantic energy. He expands, not outward in noise, but inward in strength. His presence grows larger, his composure more obvious, his authority more undeniable. By refusing to be rattled, he communicates that he is in control of himself, and by extension of the dynamic, she expects him to fold, but he stands firmer. She expects him to fill the silence, but he lets it linger until it becomes her burden, not his. Machiavelli would argue that power is most effective when it compels others to act without you forcing them. This is exactly what happens when silence is turned into advantage. By not reacting, by not crumbling, by not chasing, you force her to break the silence herself. What was meant as a weapon against you becomes a weapon against her. The more she withholds, the clearer it becomes that her strategy has failed, because your calmness renders it powerless. Instead of drawing strength from her silence, she begins to feel the discomfort of it pressing back on her. Expanding into her withdrawal also means redirecting energy. Where most men shrink, you grow. You invest your focus into yourself, your purpose, your composure, your presence. This shift unsettles her because it proves that her withdrawal does not reduce your gravity. It amplifies it. The less she engages, the more you radiate strength. The silence she created to test you becomes the silence that magnifies you. And in this magnification, she realizes that she has not diminished your power, but highlighted it. The key lies in resisting the urge to interpret her silence as an attack on your identity. It is only a test, and tests are meant to be passed not by reacting, but by revealing. You reveal who you are by what you do in the void. If you collapse, you show weakness. If you expand, you demonstrate unshakable dominance. And this dominance is not loud or forceful. It is quiet, steady, immovable. Turning silence into advantage is the art of transforming a trap into a throne. Where she retreats, you do not pursue, you occupy. Where she withholds, you do not beg, you grow stronger. Where she creates emptiness, you let your presence fill the space until her silence, once meant to control, becomes proof that she cannot. In this way, the test ends not with her victory, but with her realization that you cannot be undone by withdrawal. Because you have mastered the rarest form of power, to remain unshaken, to expand without desperation, to let silence serve you rather than destroy you.